There is a specific kind of humiliation that does not announce itself loudly. It does not shout. It does not slam doors. It does not leave marks that anyone else can see. It arrives quietly, in a meeting room, in front of people whose opinions of you matter, in the form of a smile from someone who has just taken something that belonged to you, and done it so smoothly, so confidently, that the room applauds while you sit there processing what just happened. That is the kind of humiliation I am talking about. And I want to tell you something before this story goes any further. I am not a confrontational man. I never have been. I am the man who thinks before he speaks, who would rather absorb something quietly than create a scene, who has always believed, perhaps too faithfully, that if you do good work and keep your integrity intact, the truth will eventually make itself known without you having to drag it into the light. That belief cost me more than I want to admit. And what it cost me was the reason I eventually stopped believing it. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 39 years old. I work in product development for a mid-sized technology firm in Chicago, a company I joined 8 years ago and have given, without exaggeration, the best hours of the best years of my professional life. And for approximately 14 months, a woman named Riya Sharma sat 2 desks away from me, studied everything I did, learned the architecture of how I think, and used it to build a version of herself that the company mistook for extraordinary. She was not extraordinary. She was precise. There is a difference. I learned that difference the hard way. And then I used it. This is the story of how patience, not anger, not revenge, not confrontation, is the most devastating response available to a person who has been genuinely wronged. Sit with me. This one matters. Welcome back to the channel. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every opportunity to play it straight. They had every chance to walk away clean. They just chose the hard way. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. I need to tell you about Riya before I tell you what she did. Because this is the kind of story where the person at the center of it deserves to be understood rather than simply condemned, not because what she did was acceptable, but because understanding how someone operates is the only way to understand how they were eventually stopped. Riya Sharma joined our department in the spring of 2 years ago. She was 34, sharp, and possessed of the particular quality that gets people further in corporate environments than almost any technical skill: the ability to make a room feel like she was the most important person in it without doing anything that could be specifically identified as arrogant. She walked into spaces and took them over, not aggressively, socially. She remembered names. She asked questions that suggested she had been listening carefully to conversations you had not realized she was part of. She laughed in a way that made the people around her feel included rather than observed. She was, in the most precise sense of the word, fluent in the language of rooms, of status, of the invisible hierarchies that determine whose ideas get heard and whose get absorbed into someone else's presentation. I noticed all of this. I am not unobservant. What I failed to notice in those first weeks was that her fluency had a specific application, and I was part of it. We were assigned to the same project team, a product redesign initiative that the company had been circling for 2 years without committing to. I had been building the conceptual framework for months before Riya arrived. The research, the user data analysis, the architecture of what the new product could look like and why. When she joined the team, she came to me first, which I took as natural. I was the senior member with the most context. She asked good questions. Genuinely good questions. The kind that make you want to answer at length because they demonstrate real comprehension. We had long conversations in the break room, over shared project documents in the hallway between meetings. She was curious and quick, and I found her, genuinely, to be one of the better thinking partners I had encountered in 8 years at this company. I told her things I had not told anyone else. Not secrets, professional things. The architecture of my thinking. The logic behind decisions I had made. The research paths I had gone down and abandoned, and why. The framework I was building and where I thought it was going. I told her because she asked. And because she asked so well that answering felt like collaboration rather than disclosure. I did not understand, until much later, that those were not the same thing. If you have ever watched your own ideas come out of someone else's mouth, hit the like button right now. You know exactly what comes next. The first sign was so small, I almost didn't register it as a sign at all. A team meeting. We were presenting preliminary research findings to our project lead, a man named Derek, who had the authority to determine which directions we pursued and which we shelved. I was presenting a section I had developed on user behavior patterns. I had the slides open. I was mid-sentence. Riya interrupted me. Not aggressively. That is important to understand, because aggression would have been visible, and visible things can be addressed. She interrupted helpfully. She said, "Oh, and I think what Marcus is also pointing to here is," and then finished my sentence with a slightly different version of what I had been about to say. Derek nodded at her. Not at me. At her. Because she had been the last voice in his ears. I noted it. I said nothing. The second sign came the following week. I had shared a preliminary framework document with Riya, a draft, incomplete, built on 3 months of my research, asking for her feedback before I finalized it for the team. Standard collaborative practice. She gave me feedback. Good feedback, actually. I incorporated some of it. 2 days later, Derek mentioned, in passing, that Riya had brought him an interesting framework idea that he wanted to discuss with the wider team. I read that email 3 times. I went to Riya directly. I said, as plainly as I could, that I was glad the framework was getting attention, but wanted to understand the context of how she had shared it. She said she had simply mentioned it in a conversation, that she had framed it as a team effort, which she said it was. She was warm. Reasonable. She expressed something that performed as mild surprise that I had raised it. I accepted the explanation. I should not have accepted the explanation. But I did, because I am a man who would rather extend good faith than create conflict, and because she had given me no specific, undeniable, point-to-able proof of anything. This is what sophisticated people rely on. The deniability of the small move. Each one explicable. The accumulation, invisible until it isn't. The accumulation became visible in March. The meeting that changed everything was a senior leadership presentation. Quarterly review, the kind where the people in the room have the authority to affect careers, and the kind where what happens in it gets discussed in the hallways for weeks afterward. I had been preparing for this presentation for 6 weeks. Not casually, comprehensively. The product framework I had been building for months was finally complete enough to present with confidence. I had the data, the user research, the competitive analysis, the projected outcomes. I had rehearsed the narrative until it was second nature. I had the slides, the backup slides, the answers to every question I could anticipate. I was ready. I was more ready for that presentation than I had been for anything in 8 years at this company. I walked into the conference room 15 minutes early, set up my laptop, organized my notes, watched the room fill with people whose presence confirmed the stakes. Riya arrived 3 minutes before start time. She looked at my setup. She looked at the room. She looked at me, and then she smiled the smile I now understand was not a smile at all. It was a calculation presented as warmth. She stood up. Before the meeting formally began, before Derek had opened proceedings, she stood up and said to the room, in the easy, confident tone of someone announcing something entirely normal, "I'll be presenting today." I said, "Riya." She had already walked to the front. She opened my presentation, my slides, my research, my framework, my 6 weeks of work, and she began to speak. I want to describe what the next 20 minutes felt like as precisely as I can, because I think this is the part of the story that most people who have experienced something like it will recognize. The specific paralysis of watching something happen that is so wrong and so public and so smooth that the wrongness of it almost feels like your own perception problem rather than an actual event. She presented my work fluently. Of course she did. She had seen all of it, discussed all of it, asked questions about all of it in the weeks prior. She spoke with the confidence of someone who understood what she was saying, because she had been given enough context to understand it. And then she said the thing I will carry with me for the rest of my professional life. She paused midway through, looked at me across the room with that same smile, and said to the room, not to me, "Some people are great at building things in the background. They just need someone to help bring it to the front." The room, because rooms follow the energy of the most confident person in them, produced a kind of appreciative murmur. Derek nodded. 2 of the senior managers smiled. I sat in my chair. I did not argue. I did not interrupt. I did not stand up and say any of the things that were assembling themselves in my chest with increasing pressure. I sat still, and I made a decision. Don't go anywhere. What Marcus decides in the next 60 seconds is the entire difference between this story and every other story like it. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The decision I made in that conference room chair, while Riya finished presenting my work to people who were nodding appreciatively, was not the decision that most people make in that moment. Most people make the emotional decision. They wait until the meeting ends, and then they confront, privately or publicly, calmly or not. They defend their ownership. They invoke fairness. They make the case for the thing they built being theirs. I understand why people make that decision. The injustice is real, and it is fresh, and it demands a response, and the response most immediately available is the voice. But I had been in enough rooms, over enough years, to know something about what happens when a quieter person raises a confrontation against a more socially fluent one. The confrontation becomes the story. The person who raises it becomes the problem. The original injustice gets buried under the spectacle of the response to it. I was not going to become the spectacle. What I decided, sitting in that chair, was this. I was going to document everything. Every idea I had ever shared with Riya. Every email, every draft, every timestamp, every Slack message, every version history on every shared document. I was going to build a case so complete and so chronologically undeniable that when the moment came, and I knew the moment would come, because people who operate the way Riya operated always push too far eventually, I would not need to argue. I would only need to show. I went home that evening. I opened my laptop. And I started from the beginning. What I found when I went back through my records surprised even me. Not because the evidence was unclear, it was extraordinarily clear, but because the volume of it, assembled in sequence, told a story I had been living inside without being able to see the shape of it. The first version of the product framework, created by me, 12 weeks before Riya joined the team. Timestamped. Saved on the company's shared drive with my name in the metadata. The first email in which I shared draft materials with Riya, 6 weeks later, with her explicit request and my detailed response laying out the conceptual architecture. The Slack conversation in which I had walked her through the user research methodology in granular detail. The follow-up messages in which she had asked clarifying questions that I had answered fully. The meeting notes, my meeting notes, kept in a personal document, dated and timed, from every conversation we had about the framework. The version history on the shared presentation file, which showed clearly and chronologically that my additions predated hers by weeks, and that her most significant contributions had come in the 72 hours before the senior leadership meeting. I spent 3 evenings organizing this material, not into a complaint, not into a confrontation document, into a clear, chronological, evidence-based record of authorship. The kind of record that does not require interpretation. The kind that simply is what it is. I saved it in 3 places. I sent a copy to my personal email. I noted the date. Then I waited. She came to me 10 days later. I want to give her credit for the audacity of it, because audacity is what it was. 10 days after presenting my work as effectively her own to senior leadership, she walked to my desk with 2 cups of coffee, put one in front of me, and said, with the warmth of someone resuming a perfectly normal professional relationship, "There's a new project. Big one. I think we should work on it together." I looked at her for a moment. The coffee, the smile, the complete absence of any acknowledgement of what had happened 10 days prior. I said, "Tell me about the project." She told me. It was, as she described it, the most significant initiative the company had put forward in 2 years. A full product platform redesign, not a refinement, a fundamental rethinking of the user experience from the ground up. High visibility. Cross-departmental. With a presentation to the executive team at the end of the quarter, and a promotion recommendation attached to the lead contributor. I understood immediately what she was doing. She was inviting me to build the architecture again, because she knew my architecture was good, and she intended to be the one presenting it. Most people would have said no, or would have said yes, and then spent the next several weeks in a state of angry vigilance, waiting to catch her in the act. I said yes, immediately, warmly, with what I hope was a convincing version of someone who was genuinely glad to be collaborating again, because I was not planning to catch her in the act. I was planning to let the act complete itself, in front of an audience that would not be able to look away. Before we get to the presentation, drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done differently? We read every single one. The following 6 weeks were the most disciplined of my professional life. We worked together. Ideas, planning, architecture, execution. Exactly as before. And exactly as before, she began the process of taking ownership, redirecting credit in team conversations, positioning herself as the primary driver in updates to Derek, presenting our shared decisions as her decisions, and my contributions as support. I let it happen. Every time. Not because it did not bother me. It bothered me with a precision that I can still feel in my chest when I think about those weeks. But I had made a decision about the kind of response I wanted, and the kind of response I wanted required letting the situation develop to its natural conclusion without interference. Each time she took something, I documented it. Each time she redirected credit, I noted it with a timestamp. Each time she described our work to Derek or to anyone else in terms that made her the architect and me the support structure, I saved the evidence of what had actually been built and by whom. I was also doing something else. Something she did not know about. I was requesting brief one-on-one check-ins with Derek. Not about the project specifically, about my professional development, about my career trajectory at the company, about the kind of work I wanted to be doing. These were conversations Derek was entirely willing to have. In them, without mentioning Riya directly, I began establishing something important, a direct professional relationship between my thinking and Derek's understanding of it. I walked him through ideas, mine, clearly mine, presented as mine, in contexts where there was no room for reattribution. I was building a second record, a live one, in Derek's memory. By the time presentation day arrived, Derek had heard me think through significant portions of the platform redesign in his own office, in my own voice, under my own name. He did not know yet that those ideas were about to appear in Riya's presentation, but he would recognize them when they did. The executive presentation was held on a Thursday morning. The room was the largest conference space in our building, the one reserved for events that the company considers significant. 12 people around the table, including our CEO, 2 VPs, and the head of product who had the authority to make the promotion recommendation. Riya had been preparing visibly for days. New outfit. Printed materials. The particular energy of someone who has done this before and expects it to go the way it always goes. I was calm. I want to tell you that the calmness surprised me, that I had expected to feel anxious or tense, or the particular agitation of someone waiting for a plan to either work or fail. But I felt none of those things. I felt the specific calmness of a person who has done everything they can do and is now simply present for whatever comes. She walked to the front. She smiled at the room. She opened the presentation. And she was good? I want to say that honestly because the truth requires it. She was fluent and confident, and the room was with her from the first slide. She had internalized the material well enough that she spoke about it with apparent ownership. She moved through the framework, the research, the user experience architecture, the projected outcomes. 20 minutes in, she reached the section I had been waiting for. It was the section on behavioral user segmentation, the part of the framework I had developed from a specific research methodology that I had explained to her in detail in a Slack conversation 6 weeks earlier. It was the most technically complex part of the presentation. It was also the part she understood least thoroughly, because understanding it thoroughly required having developed it, not just received it. The VP of Product asked a question. A specific, technical, methodology question. The kind that requires not just familiarity with the conclusion, but genuine understanding of how the conclusion was reached. Riya paused. It was less than 2 seconds. The room probably did not register it as significant. I registered it. Derek registered it. I saw him register it. She answered. Her answer was partially correct and partially circular. The answer of someone who knows what the conclusion is but cannot reconstruct the path to it. The VP asked a follow-up. Her answer was less confident than the first. A third question came from the CEO. Simpler, actually, but it required connecting 2 sections of the framework in a way that required understanding why they were connected, not just that they were. She looked at her notes. And I stood up. I did not stand up dramatically. I did not raise my voice. I did not announce what I was about to do or frame it as a confrontation or a correction or anything that would have made the room focus on the interpersonal dynamics rather than the information. I simply said, I can answer that. The room turned. 12 people, including Riya, looking at me. I walked to the front. I did not ask permission. I moved with the same calm authority she had always used, which I had watched carefully enough to reproduce when the moment required it. I connected my laptop. I opened my files. Not the presentation. My files. My original documents. my dated drafts, my research methodology notes with their timestamps, the version history showing the chronological development of every section of the framework sitting on the screen behind me. I answered the CEO's question fully, clearly, from the origin point of the methodology rather than the conclusion. Then I answered the VP's follow-up question. Then I walked through the behavioral segmentation section in the detail that the original questions had been probing for. The room listened. I could feel the quality of the listening change, the particular attention that assembles when people understand they are receiving information from the person who actually developed it. When I finished, I did not make an accusation. I did not say anything about Riya. I said, to Derek specifically, I'm happy to share the full development documentation for this framework. I've been keeping detailed records of the research and iteration process. Derek looked at Riya, then at me, then at the screen where my dated files were visible. He said, Please send that to me today. I said, Of course. I sat back down. The presentation concluded. Riya finished the remaining slides. But the energy in the room was different. Not hostile, clarified. The executives asked their remaining questions to me as often as to her. When they did, I answered from the same place I had always worked from, the actual origin of the thinking. When the room emptied, Derek asked us both to stay behind. If this story is finding you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe so you never miss what comes next on True Consequences. Derek's conversation with us was not long. He is not a man who performs confrontation. He is a man who resolves things efficiently and without drama, which is one of the reasons I had chosen him as the person to establish my direct professional relationship with over the preceding weeks. He said to both of us, I'm going to review the documentation Marcus mentioned. I want to understand the development history of this framework clearly before we move forward with any recommendations. Riya said something. I do not remember exactly what. Something that gestured toward collaboration and shared contribution. It was fluent. It was the kind of thing she was very good at. Derek listened. He said, I appreciate that. I still want to see the documentation. She left the room first. I sent Derek the complete documentation package that afternoon. Every draft, every timestamp, every email, every Slack conversation, every version history entry, organized chronologically, labeled clearly, requiring no interpretation. He responded 2 hours later. One line. Thank you, Marcus. Let's meet tomorrow morning. The meeting the next morning lasted 45 minutes. I walked Derek through the timeline of the framework's development, not as an accusation of Riya, but as a factual account of how the work had been built and by whom. I answered his questions. I showed him the specific dates and the specific materials. He asked, Why didn't you say something sooner? I said, I needed to be sure I was responding to the full picture rather than a single incident. And I needed to make sure that when I did respond, the response was about the truth rather than about the conflict. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. In the days that followed, things changed. Not dramatically. Institutional change rarely is. But specifically, Riya's role on the platform redesign project was restructured. Mine was expanded. The promotion recommendation, when it came 3 weeks later, had my name on it. Riya was not terminated. I want to be clear about this because I know it is what people want to hear, and I think honesty requires telling the full truth rather than the satisfying version. She was reassigned to a different team. She is still at the company. I do not know what she has done with what happened. I have not tried to find out. What I know is what my own situation looks like. And my situation looks like the thing I spent 6 weeks building the documentation for. I want to tell you what I actually learned from this, because I think the lesson is more complicated than the clean version sounds. The clean version is, I was patient, I documented everything, the truth came out, justice was served. And that is true. That is what happened. But the fuller version contains something harder. I spent 14 months being eroded before I responded effectively. 14 months of watching my ideas be received as someone else's, my work be presented under someone else's name, my professional contributions be slowly absorbed into a narrative that did not include me. And I said nothing during most of it, not because I was strategically patient, but because I genuinely believed that good work would speak for itself. It does not always speak for itself. That is the thing I wish someone had told me 14 months earlier. Good work is a necessary condition for professional recognition. It is not a sufficient one. You also have to be present in the rooms where credit is assigned. You have to have direct relationships with the people who make decisions. You have to be visible in your own thinking, not performatively, not aggressively, but clearly and consistently. Riya understood this. That is the uncomfortable truth underneath the satisfying story. She was wrong in what she did, but she was not wrong in her understanding of how professional environments actually work. Credit flows toward visibility. Visibility requires presence. Presence is a skill that some people develop naturally and others, people like me, have to learn deliberately. I learned it. Later than I should have. In a harder way than I would have chosen. But I learned it. Dr. Webb, my father, who spent 40 years in a profession where credit and attribution matter, and who taught me most of what I actually know about the difference between working hard and being seen working hard, said something to me when I told him this story. He said, "Marcus, the people who take things from you can only take what you leave unguarded. You left too much unguarded for too long. That is not a character flaw. It is a lesson. The question is what you do with the lesson." I asked him what he had done with his version of it. He said, "I started showing my work. Not just doing it. Showing it." Simple. Obvious in retrospect. The thing that needed to be said by someone who had lived it. I am showing my work now. Consistently. Directly. In the rooms where it matters. With the people who have the authority to recognize it. The framework that started all of this. The one Riya presented on a Thursday morning and I documented on 3 evenings and showed to a roomful of executives in a way that could not be reattributed, is currently being implemented across the company's product platform. My name is on the documentation. It was always on the documentation. Now everyone knows it. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 39 years old. I spent 14 months being quietly erased by someone who was very good at it, and when I finally responded, it was not with anger or confrontation or the kind of dramatic moment that feels satisfying in the telling but rarely produces what you actually need. I responded with a file. A dated, time-stamped, chronologically organized file that I sent to the right person at the right moment. And I want to leave you with the thing I keep returning to in the months since the Thursday morning presentation. The people who take from others do not stop. They cannot stop, because what they have built is not a skill, it is a dependency. They are dependent on finding the next person who does good work quietly and leaves it unguarded. When they cannot find one, when the person they are taking from has finally built the walls, they do not reform. They relocate. What you build belongs to you. Not because you believe it, because you can prove it. Build a proof before you need it. And if someone takes something that was yours, do not react in the moment. Collect the evidence. Wait for the room. then show your work. This has been a True Consequences original. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for a new story every week. Drop a comment below. We want to know, have you ever been in Marcus's position? What did you do? We read every single one. Until next time.